It started with a sound that made every officer in the Columbus Police Department stop breathing. Metal scraping against metal. A snarl so primal it didn't sound like it came from an animal. It sounded like rage given form, like fury wrapped in fur and teeth. Shadow. The name alone was enough to make veteran cops take a step back. The black German shepherd in Cage 7 wasn't just aggressive. He was legendary for all the wrong reasons. 3 handlers injured. 4 precincts. 12 failed rehabilitation attempts. The most dangerous police dog in Ohio. Officers whispered his story in hushed tones. Once a hero, now a monster. Once a loyal K-9 with more commendations than most cops earned in a career. Now a 68-pound liability with amber eyes that saw only threats. Captain Hayes stood outside the observation window, arms crossed, watching Shadow hurl himself against the reinforced bars with enough force to shake the entire wing. "He's done," Hayes said quietly. "Tomorrow we put him down." But then something impossible happened. A small voice cut through the chaos. Soft, curious, completely unafraid. "Sir, why is he crying?" Every head turned. Standing behind the glass, white cane in one hand, pale blue eyes reflecting the emergency lights, was an 8-year-old blind boy. His name was Denzel Miller. And no one, not a single person in that precinct, knew that the monster everyone feared was about to meet the only person who could see him clearly. The chaos had started 3 hours earlier, when Shadow's morning assessment went catastrophically wrong. Officer Mark Jensen had been on K-9 duty for 11 years. He'd trained German shepherds, Belgian Malinois, even a Rottweiler named Duke who could sniff out narcotics from 50 yards away. He thought he'd seen it all, until Shadow arrived from Detroit with a file thicker than a phone book and a reputation that preceded him like a storm warning. Most aggressive police dog in the state, the transfer report read. Multiple precincts. Multiple attacks. Stamped. Unfit for duty. Mark stood at the observation window now, coffee forgotten in his trembling hand, watching Shadow slam himself against the steel bars with a violence that seemed almost supernatural. Each impact sent vibrations through the floor. Alarms blared. Red emergency lights spun, casting Shadow's silhouette in hellish relief. "Jesus Christ," Mark breathed. "That's the 4th time this week, Cap. We can't keep doing this." Captain Lawrence Hayes didn't respond immediately. His jaw was tight, his eyes fixed on the dog behind the glass, the dog that used to be something extraordinary. Hayes had been the one to approve Shadow's original recruitment 5 years ago, had pinned the commendation medal on his collar after the Riverside Mall hostage situation, had stood beside Officer Ray Miller at the press conference when Shadow saved those kids from the warehouse fire in Akron. Now he was preparing to sign the euthanasia order. How many precincts has he been through? Hayes asked, though he already knew the answer. He just needed to hear it spoken aloud. Needed the weight of those numbers to make tomorrow's decision feel less like murder. 4, Mark said. Chicago sent him back after he nearly killed a trainer. Detroit wouldn't even try after they saw the incident reports. Cleveland lasted 2 weeks before he put someone in the hospital with 40 stitches. He paused. "We're the last stop, Cap. And he's getting worse, not better." Hayes turned away from the window, unable to watch anymore. On his desk sat a thin manila folder marked K-9 Shadow, classified. He'd been avoiding it all morning, but now he opened it with the reverence of someone handling evidence from a closed homicide. The photographs inside told a different story than the one unfolding in the kennel. There was Shadow at 18 months old, fresh from K-9 Academy, sitting at perfect attention beside his new handler. Officer Ray Miller's hand rested proudly on Shadow's head, both of them looking at the camera with matching expressions of determination. Another photo showed Shadow mid-leap, his body stretched horizontal as he tackled a training dummy wearing a bite suit. The caption read, 96% accuracy rate, highest in class history. Then came the newspaper clippings. Hero K-9 rescues family from burning building. Police dog Shadow tracks missing child through 8 miles of forest. Officer Miller and K-9 Shadow receive Medal of Valor. A commendation letter from the mayor. A thank you card from a woman whose daughter Shadow had pulled from a frozen pond. Awards stacked like a monument to what he'd been, what he was supposed to be. And then the final document, dated exactly 2 years, 3 months, and 17 days ago. Hayes had memorized every word. Incident report #2847, A. Officer Ray Miller, badge number 4721, Kia location, Warehouse District, East Columbus. Incident type, hostage situation/explosion. Officer Miller and K-9 Shadow responded to reports of armed suspects holding 2 civilians hostage in abandoned warehouse at 4700 Industrial Parkway. During negotiation, suspects detonated IED, causing structural collapse. Officer Miller located on 2nd floor, deceased. K-9 Shadow found at scene, non-responsive to commands, hostile toward rescue personnel. 3 first responders injured during extraction. Dog sedated and removed. Recommendation: psychiatric evaluation, behavioral assessment, possible retirement. Hayes closed the folder, his throat tight. Retirement. That's what they'd called it then, a kind word for a dog too broken to function. But retirement had turned into rehabilitation attempts. Rehabilitation had turned into transfers. Transfers had turned into this, a countdown to euthanasia. "One last assessment," Hayes said, his voice rough. "Dr. Brennan from the Animal Behavior Unit is coming tomorrow at 0900. If Shadow shows even a hint of aggression during evaluation." "Cap," Mark interrupted gently. "He shows aggression toward everyone. That's the problem." "Then we're done," Hayes finished. "I can't justify keeping a dog that's a danger to every person in this building. If he snaps tomorrow, I'm signing the order." The words landed like a judge's gavel. Mark wanted to argue. Wanted to say that Shadow deserved more time, more chances, more something. But he'd seen the scars on the last handler's arms. Had watched Shadow try to bite through the muzzle when anyone approached his cage. Had heard the stories from Chicago, Detroit, Cleveland, each one worse than the last. "It's the right call," Mark said finally, though the words tasted like ash. "That dog's not coming back. Whatever broke inside him when Ray died." He trailed off, unable to finish. "It's permanent," Hayes thought. The words he couldn't say aloud. "Before we continue, I have to know, where are you watching from? Drop your country or city in the comments below. I love seeing how far these stories travel across the world. And if you're new here, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more incredible stories that'll make you believe in the impossible. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Trust me, what happens next will blow your mind." The mention of Ray Miller hung in the air between them like smoke from an extinguished candle. Everyone in the Columbus PD knew the story. It had become legend, the kind whispered by rookies during night shifts and referenced in training sessions as an example of when everything goes wrong. The warehouse on East Industrial Parkway. The anonymous tip about hostages. Ray Miller and Shadow arriving first on scene because they'd been only 3 blocks away when the call came through. Ray's voice crackling over the radio. 2 suspects armed. "I'm going in." Then the explosion. Witnesses said it sounded like thunder trapped in a bottle. A deep concussive boom that shattered windows 4 blocks away. The warehouse's 2nd floor collapsed inward, sending flames and debris shooting skyward. By the time backup arrived, the building was an inferno. They found Ray's body on what remained of the 2nd floor, crushed beneath a fallen beam. The coroner said he'd died instantly. Small mercy in a situation with none. But Shadow had been found lying across Ray's chest, his body covering his handlers like a shield that had arrived too late. He was alive, barely. Burns on his front legs. Smoke inhalation. A gash across his shoulder from flying debris. And when the firefighters tried to move him, he'd turned feral. 3 first responders went to the hospital that night with bite wounds. It took 4 men and 2 tranquilizer darts to finally pull Shadow away from Ray's body. Even sedated, he'd fought them. Whimpering, snarling, struggling to get back to the man who would never give him another command. The department psychiatrist said it was grief. Trauma. PTSD for dogs if such a thing existed. But grief had curdled into rage. Trauma had calcified into violence. And now, 2 years later, Shadow was a ghost of what he'd been. haunted by memories he couldn't escape and pain he couldn't understand. As if summoned by the recollection, Shadow's snarling reached a fever pitch in the kennel. His claws scraped against concrete, leaving fresh grooves beside dozens of old ones. The overhead lights flickered as another collision rattled the K9 Wing's foundation. "Get him sedated," Hayes ordered. "I don't want him hurting himself before tomorrow." Mark nodded and reached for the intercom to call the vet tech. But as he turned away from the observation window, something made him pause. For just a second, less than a heartbeat, Shadow had stopped thrashing. His amber eyes fixed on something beyond the glass, something Mark couldn't see. His ears swiveled forward, alert but not aggressive. Then it was gone. Shadow lunged at the bars again, and Mark shook his head. Probably just a shadow, he thought. Or wishful thinking. He didn't know he'd been right about one of those things. That night, after the sedatives finally took hold and Shadow lay trembling in his kennel, the Columbus Police Department settled into the quiet rhythm of third shift. Dispatch calls echoed down empty hallways. Coffee brewed in the break room. Fluorescent lights hummed their eternal monotone song. In the K9 Wing, Shadow lay in the corner of Cage 7, his breathing shallow and irregular. The tranquilizers made everything fuzzy. Sounds muted, smells distant, thoughts scattered like puzzle pieces someone had dropped. But even through the chemical fog, he couldn't escape the memories. Outside, storm clouds gathered over Columbus. Thunder rumbled in the distance, low and threatening, like a warning no one heeded. Shadow's ears twitched. Thunder. His body tensed despite the sedatives, muscles coiling beneath his black fur. Thunder meant explosions. Explosions meant fire. Fire meant. The memories hit like bullets. Ray's voice cutting through smoke and chaos. Shadow, heal. Stay with. The warehouse walls buckling inward, support beams cracking like breaking bones. Flames racing up the walls, eating oxygen, turning air into poison. The smell, gunpowder, blood, burning wood, Ray's fear sweat. Running toward his handler, desperate. Paws slipping on debris-covered floor. The explosion. Light and sound and pressure, a wall of force that picked Shadow up and threw him like a toy. His body slamming into something hard. Pain exploding through his shoulder. Scrambling to his feet, disoriented, ears ringing. Finding Ray beneath the rubble, chest crushed, eyes open but not seeing. Lying across him, trying to shield him, protect him. Keep him warm even though some instinct whispered it was too late, too late, too late. Strangers in reflective suits trying to pull him away. Ray's hand cold under his paw. The horrible, crushing realization that his human, his partner, his purpose, his entire world, was gone. Shadow's eyes snapped open in the darkness of his kennel. His heart hammered against his ribs so hard it hurt. The sedatives made everything distorted like he was underwater, but the pain was crystal clear, sharp and constant, like glass embedded in his chest that cut deeper every time he breathed. He didn't understand why Ray never came back. Couldn't comprehend why every human who approached him now smelled wrong, felt wrong, was wrong. Their touches weren't Ray's touches. Their voices weren't Ray's voice. Their commands meant nothing because the only commands that mattered had died in that warehouse. They all wanted something from him, obedience, trust, submission. But Shadow had nothing left to give. He'd failed the only person who mattered. Lightning split the sky outside, illuminating the K9 Wing in stark white flashes. Thunder followed immediately. Close, aggressive, unforgiving. Shadow flinched, pressing himself against the back wall of his kennel. His breathing came in short, panicked bursts. Each inhale felt like swallowing smoke. More thunder. Closer. His growl started low in his chest, building into a snarl that echoed off concrete walls. He lunged at the bars, sedatives be damned, because the sounds were too much, the memories too vivid, and he needed to fight or run or do something because staying still meant being trapped in that burning warehouse forever, dying slowly from the inside out. The impact sensors triggered. Alarms blared. Red emergency lights began their slow rotation, painting everything in shades of danger. Upstairs in his office, Captain Hayes heard the commotion. He didn't move from his desk. Just closed his eyes and rubbed his temples, waiting for the vet tech to respond, waiting for the sedatives to take hold again, waiting for tomorrow when this would finally be over. Hayes had been in law enforcement for 28 years. He'd made 1,000 hard decisions. Signed off on undercover operations that could have gotten good people killed. Approved raids that ended in gunfire. Told families their loved ones weren't coming home. But tomorrow's decision felt different. Tomorrow, he was signing a death warrant for a hero who'd simply survived when he shouldn't have. What none of them knew, what they couldn't have known, was that 70 miles south in the small town of Millfield, Ohio, an 8-year-old boy named Denzel Miller was lying awake in his bed, listening to the same storm roll across the state. Denzel's world was darkness. Had been for 2 years now, ever since the degenerative retinal condition had stolen his sight one painful month at a time. First, the colors faded. Then the shapes. Then everything. The doctors said it was rare. Irreversible. A genetic lottery he'd lost before he even knew he was playing. But in some ways, Denzel saw more clearly than anyone around him. He heard the tremor in his mother's voice when she talked about bills piling up. Felt the weight of grief that still clung to their small house on Maple Street like morning fog that never quite burned off. Understood, in the way only children can, that something precious had been taken from them and would never, ever come back. His father. Officer Ray Miller had been everything to Denzel. Protector, teacher, hero, world. The man who taught him to ride a bike in their driveway before his vision failed. Who read him stories at bedtime using different voices for every character, making Denzel laugh so hard his stomach hurt. Who promised that no matter what happened, he'd always come home. And then one day he just didn't. Killed in the line of duty, the officers at the door had said, their voices careful and soft. Died saving others. A hero. But none of those words made sense to a 6-year-old boy who just wanted his dad to walk through the door one more time and say, "Hey, kiddo. Miss me?" Denzel's fingers traced the worn edge of his father's police badge, which he kept on his nightstand within reach. Badge number 4721. He'd memorized every ridge, every scratch, every imperfection. Sometimes, if he concentrated really hard, he imagined he could still smell Ray's cologne on the metal. Cedar and leather and something else that was just Dad. The thunder growled outside his window, and Denzel pulled his blanket closer. He'd always hated storms, but they'd become unbearable after that night. The night 2 uniformed officers came to their door with their hats in their hands and their faces heavy with news that would shatter everything. His mother, Christine, appeared in his doorway. He couldn't see her, but he knew her presence by the sound of her breathing and the faint scent of the lavender lotion she wore. "Can't sleep, baby." "The thunder's too loud," Denzel whispered. Christine crossed the room. He counted her footsteps automatically, a habit he'd developed when the world went dark, and sat on the edge of his bed. Her hand smoothed his hair, the same gesture she'd been making since he was a toddler. "Want me to stay until it passes?" Denzel nodded. She lay down beside him, her arm around his small shoulders, and they listened to the rain hammer against the windows. After a long moment of shared silence, she said softly, "Your class field trip is tomorrow. To Columbus. The police station. Are you excited?" The Millfield Elementary 3rd grade class had been planning the trip for months. Most of the kids were thrilled. They'd get to see patrol cars up close, maybe sit in a holding cell, possibly even meet the K-9 unit if they were lucky. Denzel wasn't sure how he felt about it. Police stations reminded him of the day everything fell apart. Of sitting in a hard plastic chair in the lobby while adults whispered in corners. Of the smell of coffee and copy machines and sadness. Of going home without his father. "I guess," he said quietly. Christine kissed his forehead, her lips trembling slightly. "Your dad would be so proud of you, you know that? So brave. So strong." But Denzel didn't feel brave. He felt small and scared and tired of pretending everything was okay when nothing had been okay for 834 days. He'd counted. Outside, the storm raged on. In Columbus, Shadow finally exhausted himself, collapsing in the corner of his kennel with foam still flecking his muzzle. His eyes remained open, unblinking, unfocused, staring at shadows only he could see. 70 miles away, Denzel drifted into uneasy sleep, his small hand still clutching his father's badge like a talisman against the dark. Two broken souls, separated by distance and circumstance, moving toward a collision neither could predict. Tomorrow everything would change. Tomorrow, the beast in the cage would meet the boy who couldn't see fear. And in that moment, in that impossible, inexplicable moment, Shadow's growl would die mid-snarl as a small hand reached toward the bars. And Shadow wouldn't bite. What would you do if everyone told you something was dangerous, but your heart said otherwise? Would you trust your instincts, or listen to the warnings? Drop your answer in the comments. I genuinely want to know what you'd choose. The yellow school bus pulled into the Columbus Police Department parking lot at exactly 9:47 a.m., 17 minutes late because of construction on Route 33. Mrs. Patricia Hendricks, third-grade teacher at Millfield Elementary, stepped off first, clipboard in hand, already doing a mental head count before the children even stood up. "Remember the rules," she called over her shoulder. "Stay together, no running, and absolutely no touching anything without permission." 23 eight-year-olds filed out in a chaotic parade of backpacks and excitement. Most had been talking about this trip for weeks, the chance to see real police cars, maybe try on a uniform, possibly even watch a K-9 demonstration if they were lucky. Among them, moving more slowly than the others, was Denzel Miller. His white cane swept in practiced arcs across the parking lot pavement, tapping out a rhythm only he understood. His pale blue eyes, beautiful but unseeing, reflected the morning sun. While the other children bounced with nervous energy, Denzel walked with an unusual calm, one hand gripping his cane, the other holding loosely to the guide rope Mrs. Hendricks had strung through the group. "Stay close, Denzel," she said gently, though she didn't need to. Of all her students, he was the least likely to wander. Officer Mark Jensen met them at the entrance, his smile firmly in place despite having gotten maybe 3 hours of sleep after last night's incident with Shadow. "Welcome to Columbus PD," he said with forced enthusiasm. "Who's ready to see what real police work looks like?" A chorus of me, me, erupted from the group. Mark led them through the lobby, pointing out the dispatch center, the holding cells, the evidence room behind its reinforced door. The kids pressed their faces against glass, asked 100 questions, and took photos with their disposable cameras. Denzel hung back slightly, listening. He heard the radio chatter from dispatch, the echo of footsteps in the corridor, the way voices bounced differently off concrete versus drywall. His world was built from sounds and textures and spatial awareness, and this building spoke to him in a language the other children couldn't hear. It smelled like his father used to smell when he came home from work. Coffee, gun oil, industrial cleaner, and something else. Something that made Denzel's chest tight. "And now," Mark announced as they approached the K-9 wing, "if you're very quiet and very careful, we might be able to show you our police dogs." The children's excitement reached a fever pitch. Mark hesitated at the door, his hand on the handle. Behind that door was Shadow, still sedated from last night but probably awake by now. Probably pacing. Probably ready to lose his mind the moment 23 children started squealing. This was a terrible idea, but Captain Hayes had insisted. "Give them the tour," he'd said that morning. "Let them see the good parts of this department before tomorrow." The unspoken words hung heavy. Before we put Shadow down. Mark pushed open the door. The K-9 wing was dimmer than the main building, lit by overhead fluorescents that hummed like sleeping bees. 3 kennels lined the left wall. 2 empty, 1 occupied. The children crowded around the observation window, jostling for position. "That's Shadow," Mark said, keeping his voice neutral. He's resting right now. He's been through a lot." Shadow lay in the corner of his kennel, head on his paws, but his amber eyes were open and tracking, watching. The moment the children's voices rose, his ears flattened against his skull. "He's so big," one girl gasped. "Is he friendly?" A boy asked. "Can we pet him?" Another voice chimed in. "No," Mark said quickly. Too quickly. "Shadow is. He's not ready for visitors. He's still in training." Training. What a lie that was. Shadow's lip curled, showing teeth. A low growl rumbled from his chest, Not loud, but enough to make several children step back from the glass. Is he angry? Someone whispered. He's just. He sounds lonely. Every head turned. Denzel stood apart from the group, his cane resting against his leg. His head tilted slightly as if listening to something beyond the growl. His expression was thoughtful, sad even. What was that, Denzel? Mrs. Hendricks asked. He sounds lonely, Denzel repeated, louder this time. Not angry. Lonely. Mark opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, Denzel took a step toward the kennel door. Not the observation window where it was safe, but the actual door with the reinforced lock and the warning signs. Whoa, hey. Mark moved quickly, putting himself between the boy and the door. Buddy, you can't go in there. That dog is hurting, Denzel finished. His unseeing eyes were fixed somewhere in Shadow's direction, and even though he couldn't see the dog, it felt like he was looking straight through the walls, straight through the bars, straight into Shadow's broken soul. He's not bad. He's hurting. Behind the glass, Shadow had gone very still. His growl died in his throat. His ears, which had been flat, slowly rotated forward. He was listening. Denzel, step back, Mrs. Hendricks said nervously. She'd read the waiver forms for this trip. She knew the police department had a dangerous dog on site. Come back with the group, sweetheart. But Denzel didn't move. Instead, he did something that made Mark's heart stop. He knelt down. Right there on the concrete floor, he knelt, folded his cane across his lap, and pressed one small hand against the kennel door. Kid, N.O. Mark lunged forward, already imagining the lawsuit, the injury report, the headlines. Blind child mauled by police dog during school trip. But he was too slow. Shadow exploded into motion. 70 pounds of muscle and fury launched from the corner of the kennel, charging the door with the kind of speed that belonged to predators, to hunters, to things built for violence. His paws thundered against concrete. His teeth were bared. His amber eyes locked onto the small hand pressed against the bars. Children screamed. Mrs. Hendricks grabbed for Denzel, trying to pull him back. Shadow hit the door with enough force to rattle the entire frame. And stopped. Inches from Denzel's hand. Inches from the bars. Close enough that his hot breath fogged the metal. But he didn't bite. Didn't snap. Didn't attack. He just stopped. His body trembled, every muscle taut like a wire pulled too tight. His breathing came in short, harsh bursts. But he stood there, frozen, staring at the small hand that wasn't pulling away, wasn't fleeing, wasn't doing anything except remaining calm and open and there. The K-9 wing had gone silent. Even the children had stopped screaming, too shocked to make a sound. Denzel spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. It's okay, he said. You're not bad. You're hurting. I know. I'm hurting too. Shadow's ears twitched. His head tilted slightly, the same gesture Denzel had made moments before, like he was trying to understand a language he'd forgotten he knew. My daddy's gone too, Denzel continued, and his voice cracked on the word daddy. He's not coming back. And it hurts all the time, doesn't it? Like something broke inside and nobody knows how to fix it. Shadow took a step back from the door. Then another. But his eyes never left Denzel's face. In the observation room, Captain Hayes had appeared, drawn by the commotion. He stood beside Mark, both men frozen, watching something that defied every training manual, every behavioral assessment, every logical explanation. Jesus Christ, Hayes breathed. Is that Ray Miller's kid? Mark finished. That's his son. The realization hit them both like a freight train. Denzel was still speaking, his voice soft but steady. You don't have to be scared anymore. You don't have to fight. You're just trying to protect something that's already gone, aren't you? Shadow's growl had completely died. His body was still tense, still wary, but something had shifted. Something fundamental. Then Denzel did something that made the officer's blood run cold. He stood up, folded his cane, and placed his hand flat against the kennel door again. And he whispered, so quietly that Mark barely heard it through the glass. Sit. For 2 years, Shadow had ignored every command. Every sit, every stay, every heel had been met with snarls or attacks or violent indifference. Trainers from 4 precincts had tried and failed. But now, in this moment, with this blind boy's hand against the bars and this soft voice that carried echoes of someone Shadow had loved more than life itself, Shadow sat. Slowly. Deliberately. Like muscle memory overriding trauma. His haunches lowered to the concrete. His tail, which had been tucked tight against his body, relaxed slightly. His amber eyes stayed fixed on Denzel's face. He sat. Mrs. Hendricks's clipboard clattered to the floor. Several children gasped. Mark's hand went to his radio, then dropped uselessly to his side because what was he going to report? The violent dog just obeyed a blind 8-year-old? Captain Hayes stared through the glass like he'd seen a ghost. Because, in a way, he had. Standing there in that dim corridor with his father's blood and his father's voice and his father's fearless heart, Denzel Miller looked exactly like Ray had looked 2 years ago. Before the warehouse, before the explosion, before everything went wrong. And Shadow, the dog everyone had given up on, the monster marked for death, sat like a perfect K-9 Academy graduate and waited for his next command. Has a stranger ever understood you better than people who've known you for years? Have you ever connected with someone instantly, like they could see straight through to your soul? Drop your story in the comments. I want to hear about those impossible connections that changed everything. The security footage played on loop in Captain Hayes's office. Grainy and surreal, like watching something that shouldn't exist. Timestamp. 9 hours 58 minutes and 47 seconds. Shadow charging the kennel door, all fury and teeth. 9 hours 58 minutes and 51 seconds. The dog stopping inches from the boy's hand, trembling like he'd hit an invisible wall. 9 hours 59 minutes and 3 seconds. Shadow sitting. Actually sitting. On command. Mark Jensen had watched it 17 times now, and it still didn't make sense. His coffee had gone cold an hour ago, forgotten on the desk beside a stack of incident reports that suddenly seemed irrelevant. Run it again, Hayes said from behind him, arms crossed, face unreadable. Mark clicked rewind. The footage jumped backward. Shadow standing, Shadow charging, Shadow lying in the corner. He let it play forward once more. Watching the exact moment everything changed. There, Hayes pointed at the screen. Right there. Look at his body language. Shadow's ears, which had been flat with aggression, suddenly rotated forward. His posture shifted from predatory to something else. Uncertain. Confused. Almost hopeful. It's like he recognized something, Mark said quietly. Not something. Someone. Hayes reached past him and paused the footage on Denzel's face, the blind boy kneeling at the door, hand pressed against the bars, completely unafraid. Find out who that kid is. Parents, background, everything. Already did. Mark pulled up another window on the computer. Denzel Miller. 8 years old. Lives in Millfield with his mother, Christine Miller. Father deceased. He stopped, his finger hovering over the mouse as his brain caught up with what his eyes were seeing. Oh my God. What? Father's name. Ray Miller. Officer Ray Miller. The office went silent except for the hum of the computer and the distant sound of phones ringing in dispatch. Hayes leaned forward, reading over Mark's shoulder. Ray's kid. That's Ray's kid. Has to be. Same last name, Millfield address matches Ray's emergency contact file, age is right. Mark scrolled down, his heart racing. Captain, that means Shadow and Denzel. Knew each other, Hayes finished. Before Ray died, before the explosion, they knew each other. Mark was already pulling up Shadow's complete file, the classified one with the full history. Military service records, deployment dates, injury reports, behavioral assessments. And photos. Dozens of photos spanning 5 years. He clicked through them rapidly. Shadow at K-9 Academy graduation. Shadow and Ray Miller at their first medal ceremony. Shadow mid-training exercise, launching over a 6-foot wall. Shadow and Ray in tactical gear beside a SWAT van. Then he found it. A candid photo, slightly out of focus. Clearly taken during a department picnic or family day. Ray Miller sat on a bench in full uniform, grinning at the camera. Shadow lay at his feet, tongue lolling, relaxed. And in Ray's arms, held against his chest like the most precious thing in the world, was a toddler. Maybe 3 years old, with pale blue eyes and a smile that could light up rooms. Mark's hands shook as he zoomed in on the child's face. The same eyes. The same slight upturn of the nose. The same expression Denzel had worn this morning when he knelt at Shadow's cage. Jesus, Mark breathed. Shadow knows him. He knows him. Hayes grabbed the mouse and scrolled through more photos. There, another one. Ray and Shadow at someone's backyard barbecue, Ray flipping burgers while a slightly older Denzel, maybe 4, sat cross-legged on the grass, tiny hands buried in Shadow's fur. The dog's eyes were closed, completely at peace. Another photo, Ray in civilian clothes, throwing a tennis ball while Shadow sprinted after it and young Denzel clapped from his spot on a blanket, laughing. Another, Shadow lying on a living room floor, Denzel curled up against him like a pillow, both of them asleep. The narrative wrote itself across the images. A family. Not just a handler and his canine partner, but a family. Shadow hadn't just lost his partner in that warehouse. He'd lost everything. This changes things, Hayes said quietly. Changes what? The dog recognized the kid, so what? He's still violent. Still dangerous. Still marked for. Mark couldn't finish the sentence. Look at the footage again, Hayes insisted. Really look at it. Mark played it once more, but this time he didn't watch Shadow. He watched Denzel. The way the boy moved with absolute confidence toward something everyone else feared. The way he spoke, soft and certain, like he was talking to an old friend he hadn't seen in years. You're not bad. You're hurting. How did an 8-year-old blind kid know that? How did he see what 4 precincts worth of trained professionals had missed? The boy was there, Hayes said slowly, working through the logic. When Shadow and Ray were partners. Shadow probably saw him every day. Protected him, played with him. And then Ray died. And Shadow never saw the kid again. For 2 years, Shadow's been surrounded by strangers. People who smell wrong, sound wrong, are wrong. Because none of them are Ray. But Denzel. Mark continued the thought. He sounds like Ray. Same family. Probably same vocal patterns. Same genetic markers. Shadow doesn't understand death. He just knows Ray disappeared. And now someone who sounds like Ray, who feels like Ray, walks up to his cage. It's not aggression, Hayes said, the realization settling over him like a weight. It's grief. Shadow's been grieving for 2 years, and everyone mistook it for violence. Mark sat back in his chair, overwhelmed. They'd been preparing to euthanize a dog for mourning his family. We need to test this, Hayes said, already moving toward the door. Controlled environment. See if it was a fluke or if the boy can actually reach him. 3 hours later, they'd set up what Mark privately called the most unauthorized psychological experiment in department history. Denzel's mother, Christine, had been shocked by the phone call, then skeptical, then ultimately agreed to return to the precinct for just an hour. She stood now in the observation room, watching through reinforced glass as her son sat on a plastic chair in the K9 wing corridor. Shadow paced in his kennel, agitated by the unusual activity but not actively aggressive. I don't understand what you think is going to happen, Christine said nervously. Denzel's blind. He can't train a dog. We're not asking him to train Shadow, Mark explained. We just want to see if Shadow responds to him differently than to other people. What he didn't say, we're trying to figure out if your dead husband's dog recognizes your son's voice as a reason to keep living. Hayes gave the signal. Mark pressed the intercom button. Denzel, can you say something? Anything. Just talk. Denzel shifted in his chair, uncomfortable being the center of attention. Hi, Shadow. It's me. From earlier. Shadow stopped pacing immediately. His ears rotated toward the sound. His entire body going still. That's good, Mark encouraged. Keep talking. I remember you, Denzel said, his voice gaining confidence. I was really little, but I remember. You were soft. And you smelled like outside. Like grass and... He paused, thinking. Like Daddy's truck. Shadow moved to the front of the kennel, pressing his nose against the bars. Christine's hand went to her mouth. Oh my God. He does remember. Denzel was what, for when Ray died? Hayes asked. 3.5, Christine whispered. He'd just started preschool. Ray would bring Shadow home sometimes on days off. Denzel loved that dog more than any toy we ever bought him. On screen, Denzel continued talking, his voice soft and steady. You used to let me sleep on you, like a big warm pillow. And you'd lick my face when I cried. Mom said you were the best babysitter ever. Shadow whined, a sound none of them had heard from him in 2 years. Not aggressive. Not territorial. Just sad. Now I'm going to send Officer Jensen in, Hayes said through the intercom. Don't worry, Denzel. He's just going to stand there. Mark entered the corridor, moving slowly. Shadow's demeanor changed instantly. Ears flat, lip curled, a warning growl building in his chest. Easy, Mark said, but Shadow's growl intensified. Denzel, say something, Hayes instructed. It's okay, Shadow, Denzel said immediately. He's nice. He's a friend. The growl didn't stop, but it lowered in volume. Shadow's eyes tracked Mark but didn't leave Denzel. They ran the test 4 more times with different officers. Every time someone entered without Denzel speaking, Shadow became aggressive. The moment Denzel's voice filled the space, Shadow's aggression dampened, not disappeared, but controllable. The pattern was undeniable. He's using the boy as an anchor, Hayes said, watching the 5th test. Like Denzel's voice tells him the world isn't completely hostile. This is a miracle, Christine said, tears streaming down her face. After Ray died, I thought Shadow was gone too. They said he attacked people. That he was too dangerous. He was, Mark said honestly. To everyone except your son. After the tests, Christine took Denzel to the break room for snacks while the officers debated what came next. Mark stood in Hayes' office, watching the captain pace behind his desk. This is incredible PR, Hayes said, but his tone suggested he saw the problem. Boy who lost his father connects with his father's traumatized K9. It's a feel-good story. Media would eat it up. Department could use the positive attention. But, Mark prompted, but Shadow's still a liability. He only calms for one specific child. What happens when Denzel's not here? What happens if we certify Shadow for duty and he snaps in the field? We don't certify him, Mark suggested. We retire him. Let Christine adopt him as Denzel's service dog. Hayes stopped pacing. A violent K9 as a blind kid's service animal? A grieving K9 who just found his family again, Mark corrected. Captain, you saw the footage. That dog would die for that boy. He already almost did once in that warehouse. Hayes sat down heavily, the weight of the decision visible on his face. Let me think about it. We have until tomorrow morning before Dr. Brennan's evaluation. If we're going to cancel the euthanasia order, I need to be sure. Mark nodded and turned to leave. As he reached the door, his eye caught on a photograph half buried under incident reports on Hayes' desk. He pulled it out carefully. It was another photo from Shadow's file, this one formal, taken at a medal ceremony. Ray Miller stood at attention in dress uniform, Shadow sitting perfectly beside him. Both of them focused on the camera with military precision. Mark flipped it over. On the back, in Ray's handwriting, was a caption, Officer Ray Miller and Shadow, partners for life. And below that, added later in different ink, shakier handwriting, taken 6 months before the warehouse. Denzel, 3, insisted on wearing Daddy's backup badge for the ceremony. Wouldn't take it off for a week. Mark's blood ran cold. He looked closer at the photo, at the details he'd missed before. There, in Ray's arms, barely visible behind the formal pose, was a toddler wearing an oversized police badge on a lanyard, grinning at something off camera. The same badge Denzel had been clutching that night during the storm. The same badge Ray had been wearing when he died. Mark's hands trembled as understanding crashed over him. Shadow hadn't just recognized Denzel's voice this morning. He'd recognized the badge. Ray's badge. The one piece of Ray that Denzel carried everywhere. The one thing that smelled exactly like his lost partner. Mark turned toward Hayes' office door, ready to share his discovery, when his radio crackled to life. All units, be advised. Escaped fugitive Vincent Carter spotted on East Side. Consider armed and extremely dangerous. Subject has sworn vendetta against CPD. Approach with caution. The name hit Mark like a punch to the gut. Vincent Carter. The dirty cop Ray Miller had been investigating before he died. The man who'd allegedly set up the warehouse ambush. The man who'd disappeared after Ray's death, vanishing before Internal Affairs could build their case. And now he was back. Mark grabbed his radio. "Captain, we have a problem." The lights went out. Every light in the building. Emergency backups kicked in after 3 seconds, bathing everything in red. And from somewhere in the building, too close, way too close, came the sound of gunfire. When the past comes back to haunt you, it doesn't knock first. Have you ever felt like something you thought was over was just waiting in the shadows? Drop a fire if this gave you chills, and buckle up, because what happens next will leave you breathless. The gunfire lasted exactly 7 seconds. 3 shots in rapid succession from somewhere on the first floor, followed by shouting, then silence so heavy it felt like the building itself was holding its breath. Mark's hand went to his sidearm as he bolted from Hayes' office. The red emergency lights painted everything in shades of blood and shadow. His radio erupted with overlapping voices. Shots fired, first floor. Dispatch, we need backup. Lockdown protocol, secure all. Somebody get eyes on the threat. Hayes was already moving, weapon drawn, years of training overriding the shock. Jensen, get to the break room. The kid and his mother are there. Mark didn't argue. He ran. The hallways felt longer than they should. His boots pounding against linoleum as emergency klaxons began their rhythmic wail. Officers poured from offices, some heading toward the gunfire, others shepherding civilians toward secure rooms. The break room door was still open when Mark reached it. Christine stood in the doorway, Denzel pressed against her side, his white cane gripped like a weapon. Her face was pale but determined, the expression of a woman who'd already lost one person to this job and refused to lose another. "What's happening?" she demanded. "Lockdown. Someone's in the building." Mark ushered them back inside, scanning the corridor. "Stay here. Don't open this door for anyone except me or Captain Hayes." "Mom." Denzel's voice was small, scared. "What's going on?" "It's okay, baby. It's..." Christine's voice cracked. She pulled Denzel closer. "Officer Jensen, please tell me this isn't..." She didn't finish, but Mark knew what she was thinking. "Please tell me I didn't bring my son to the place where his father's killer might be." "We don't know anything yet," Mark said, which was both true and a lie. "Just stay here." He pulled the door shut and heard the lock click. Then he moved toward the main corridor, following the sound of urgent voices. The scene on the first floor looked like controlled chaos. 3 officers had a perimeter established around the evidence room. The door hung open, lock shot to pieces. Captain Hayes stood in the center, radio in one hand, weapon in the other, coordinating the response. No sign of the shooter. West stairwell door was forced. Looks like they got in during the power outage. What did they take? Hayes demanded. The evidence tech, a thin woman named Rodriguez, emerged from the room, her face ashen. Cold cases. Specifically, unsolved officer-involved incidents from 2 to 3 years ago. Mark's stomach dropped. The Ray Miller case. Rodriguez nodded. Files gone. Every piece of physical evidence related to the warehouse explosion. Photos, witness statements, forensic reports. All of it. Hayes' jaw clenched so tight Mark heard his teeth grind. Lock this down. Nobody talks about this outside this building. Understood. A murmur of assent rippled through the assembled officers. But Mark had seen the look that passed between Hayes and Deputy Chief Warren, a look that said this wasn't surprising. This was expected. Maybe even anticipated. 30 minutes later, after the building had been searched and cleared, After the all-clear sounded and normal lights flickered back on, Mark found himself in a supply closet pretending to inventory ammunition while actually eavesdropping on a conversation in the adjacent office. He hadn't meant to spy. He'd been restocking his belt when Hayes and Warren's voices filtered through the thin wall, low and urgent. "Can't let this resurface," Warren was saying. Ray Miller's case was closed. Accidental explosion during a hostage situation. If people start digging. "Someone already is digging," Hayes interrupted. "They didn't break in here for nothing. They want those files." Then thank God they got them. Less evidence means less questions. Mark froze, his hand halfway to a box of 9mm rounds. "Vincent Carter's back," Hayes said, and the name hung in the air like a curse. The fugitive alert came through right before the breach. "You think that's a coincidence?" "Carter was cleared by IA," Warren said, but his tone suggested even he didn't believe it. Carter was Ray's suspect. Ray had evidence of corruption, evidence that Carter was feeding information to the Moreno cartel, evidence that got buried when Ray died. Hayes's voice dropped. "If this resurfaces, if someone proves the explosion wasn't bad luck." "We cannot afford that," Warren cut in sharply. "The department cannot afford that. Do you understand what I'm saying?" Silence. Then Hayes. "Crystal clear, sir." "Good. Then we're done here." Mark heard footsteps approaching and quickly grabbed a random box, trying to look busy. Warren passed by the supply closet without a glance, but Hayes stopped, his hand on the doorframe. "You hear something you shouldn't have, Jensen?" Mark met his captain's eyes. "No, sir." Hayes studied him for a long moment. "Good. Because what you didn't hear was confidential. And bringing it up would be a career-ending mistake." He walked away, leaving Mark standing among boxes of ammunition with a growing certainty that Ray Miller hadn't died in an accident. He'd been murdered. 2 days passed before Christine agreed to bring Denzel back to the precinct. "I don't know if this is a good idea," she said, standing in the lobby with Denzel's hand in hers. "After what happened." "We've tripled security," Mark assured her. "And Denzel's visits with Shadow have been approved by the captain. It's helping." That was an understatement. Since Denzel's first visit, Shadow had been different. Still wary, still traumatized, but no longer constantly aggressive. He ate more, slept better, didn't throw himself against the kennel bars every time someone walked past. It was like someone had found the off switch to his rage. Christine sighed. 1 hour. That's it. They made their way to the K9 wing, Denzel's cane tapping a familiar rhythm. Shadow was already at the front of his kennel before they rounded the corner, ears pricked, body tense but not hostile. "Hi, Shadow," Denzel said softly. The dog's tail gave a single, tentative wag. But it was Christine's voice that shattered the careful calm. "Oh my God," she breathed, stepping closer to the observation window. "Shadow, is that really you?" The effect was instantaneous and devastating. Shadow's entire body went rigid. A whine built in his throat. High, keening, the sound of grief made audible. He began pacing frantically, his eyes locked on Christine's face, and Mark realized with a jolt that the dog recognized her. Of course he did. She was Ray's wife. Ray's partner. Part of the family Shadow had lost. "You never told me he survived," Christine said, tears streaming down her face. "After Ray died, they said they said he was gone. I thought that meant." "They sent him away," Mark said quietly. "He was too traumatized to stay. Too violent." "He's not violent," Denzel said, his hand finding the kennel door. "He's sad." Shadow's whine intensified. He pressed against the bars, trying to get closer to Christine, and the sound he made was almost human. Raw and broken and filled with an anguish that 2 years hadn't dulled. "I'm sorry," Christine whispered to the dog. "I'm so sorry. I should have tried to find you. I should have." She couldn't finish. Denzel reached out, and Shadow shifted his attention to the boy, some of the frantic energy bleeding away. Mark watched them, his mind churning. Shadow had been there when Ray died. Had seen everything. If the explosion wasn't an accident, If someone had said it deliberately, Shadow would know. No wonder they'd sent him away so quickly. No wonder his file was classified. He wasn't just a traumatized K-9. He was a witness. Mrs. Miller, Mark said carefully, did Ray ever talk to you about his cases? Specifically, the ones he was working on before he died. Christine wiped her eyes. Sometimes. Why? Did he ever mention Vincent Carter? Her expression changed, something cold and hard settling over her features. The dirty cop. Yes. Ray was obsessed with proving Carter was taking cartel money. He had files, recordings, evidence. He said Carter was dangerous. That he'd do anything to protect himself. What happened to those files? I don't know. After Ray died, Internal Affairs came to the house. They took everything. His computer, his notes, boxes of documents. Said it was part of the investigation. She paused. They never gave any of it back. Mark's radio crackled. Jensen, we need you in Hayes's office. Now. He excused himself, leaving Christine and Denzel with Shadow, and made his way upstairs. The captain's office was more crowded than he expected. Hayes, Deputy Chief Warren, and 2 men in suits Mark didn't recognize. These are Agents Morrison and Tate from the FBI, Hayes said. They have questions about the break-in. The taller agent, Morrison, studied Mark with the kind of intensity that made innocent people feel guilty. Officer Jensen, you were one of the first responders to the breach. Did you see anyone? Hear anything unusual? Mark recounted the events mechanically, but his mind was elsewhere, putting pieces together. FBI involvement meant this was bigger than a simple break-in. The stolen files. Vincent Carter's reappearance. Ray Miller's supposedly accidental death. It was all connected. When the agents finally dismissed him, Mark headed back to the K-9 wing. He needed to think, to process, to figure out what to do with information he wasn't supposed to have. He never made it. Halfway down the corridor, his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Stop digging. Ray Miller's death was investigated and closed. For your sake and the boy's sake, leave it alone. Mark's blood ran cold. He looked around the empty hallway, suddenly aware of how many security cameras dotted the ceiling, how many people had access to his phone number, how many ways someone could be watching. Outside the Columbus Police Department, parked in a lot across the street with a clear view of the main entrance, a man sat in a dark sedan with tinted windows. Vincent Carter looked older than his 43 years, his face lined with stress and anger and 2 years of living as a fugitive. But his eyes were sharp, calculating, tracking everyone who entered and exited the building. His phone rang. He answered without looking at the caller ID. Status. Shadow's still alive, Carter said, his voice flat. And Miller's kid is with him. A pause on the other end. Then, the dog saw what happened that night. Dogs can't testify. But they remember. And if someone figures out how to prove the explosion was intentional, if they connect it back to you, then I deal with it, Carter interrupted. Same way I dealt with Ray Miller. He hung up and pulled out a different phone, this one a burner. His fingers moved across the screen, pulling up surveillance footage he'd hacked from the precinct's external cameras. There, Christine Miller and her son walking to their car in the parking garage. The blind kid with his cane, the mother with her hand protectively on his shoulder. Carter zoomed in on the boy's face. Ray Miller's son. The kid who could somehow calm the one witness to Ray's murder. Carter's finger hovered over the screen, tracing the path from the precinct to where the Miller's car was parked. He started his engine and pulled a weapon from the glove compartment, checking the magazine with practiced efficiency. If Shadow remembered what happened that night, if the dog somehow communicated it to the right person, everything Carter had built, every dollar he'd taken, every deal he'd made, every life he'd destroyed, would come crashing down. He couldn't allow that. He put the car in gear and began to follow. 2 years ago, he'd eliminated the father. Now it was time to eliminate the son. Sometimes the most dangerous enemy isn't the one in front of you. It's the one who's been watching from the shadows all along. Drop a skull if you saw that coming. And hold on tight because the next chapter is where everything explodes. Mark didn't go home that night. He sat in his car in the precinct parking lot, engine off, watching Christine Miller's taillights disappear into Columbus traffic. His phone lay on the passenger seat, the threatening text message still glowing on the screen. "Stop digging. For your sake and the boy's sake, leave it alone." Someone inside the department was watching him. Someone with access to his personal information, to security footage, to the investigation files that had supposedly been stolen. Someone who didn't want the truth about Ray Miller's death coming to light. Mark's hands tightened on the steering wheel. He could do what the message said: back off, stay quiet, protect his career and his life. It would be the smart thing, the safe thing. Or he could walk back into that building and demand answers. He looked up at the precinct, 4 stories of concrete and glass, lit from within like a beacon. Somewhere in there, Captain Hayes knew more than he was saying. Somewhere in there was the truth about what really happened 2 years ago. Mark grabbed his phone and got out of the car. He found Hayes in his office at 11:47 p.m., tie loosened, nursing a whiskey that definitely violated department policy but that nobody would dare question. The captain looked up when Mark entered without knocking, and something like resignation crossed his face. "I was wondering when you'd come back," Hayes said. Mark closed the door behind him. What really happened to Ray Miller? Jensen. No. Mark's voice was harder than he'd ever used with a superior officer. "I've been patient. I've followed orders. I've kept my mouth shut while people broke into our evidence room and stole files, while Deputy Chief Warren basically admitted there's a cover-up, while someone sent me anonymous threats." He pulled out his phone, showed Hayes the text. "So I'm asking you, Captain, as someone who served with Ray, as someone who's now watching his kid try to heal a traumatized dog, what really happened?" Hayes stared at the message for a long moment, then took another drink. When he spoke, his voice was tired, defeated. Vincent Carter was dirty. Ray knew it, could prove it. He'd been building a case for 8 months, recordings of Carter meeting with Moreno cartel contacts, bank transfers, evidence that Carter was feeding operational intel to the cartels in exchange for a cut of their drug money. Mark felt his chest tighten. And Ray was scheduled to present his evidence to Internal Affairs the morning after the warehouse call. That hostage situation. The anonymous tip that sent Ray and Shadow there. Hayes looked up, his eyes hard. There were no hostages. It was a setup. The words landed like bullets. "Someone on the inside sold them out," Hayes continued. "Fed Ray false intel. Knew he'd respond first because he and Shadow were the closest unit. The explosion was meant to look like bad luck, a meth lab cooking operation gone wrong, accelerants in the building, wrong place, wrong time. But it was murder. It was murder," Hayes confirmed. And Carter had the connections to make it look like anything but. The crime scene was contaminated. Evidence disappeared. Witnesses changed their stories. By the time IA realized what they were looking at, Carter had already vanished and the case was dead in the water. Mark's mind raced. Why didn't you tell anyone? Why cover it up? Because I couldn't prove it. Hayes slammed his glass down hard enough to crack it. Every piece of hard evidence Ray had collected vanished within hours of his death. His backup files were corrupted. His confidential informant disappeared. Probably dead. All I had were suspicions and a dead officer everyone wanted to memorialize as a hero, not a murder victim in a departmental corruption scandal. So you just let it go. I've been trying to build a new case for 2 years, Hayes said. Quietly. Carefully. But Carter's good at covering his tracks, and he's got friends in places high enough to make my life very difficult. He gestured at Mark's phone. Friends who apparently know you're asking questions. Mark sank into a chair, the weight of it crushing. Shadow knows. That's why they sent him away so fast. He was there. He saw who set the explosives, heard voices, could identify. A dog can't testify in court, Hayes interrupted. But he could trigger someone's memory. Could get people asking the right questions. So yes, Shadow became inconvenient. Better to label him traumatized and violent. Ship him between precincts until everyone forgot he existed. Until Denzel showed up. Hayes nodded slowly. Until Ray Miller's blind son walked up to that cage and Shadow recognized him. Now people are paying attention again. Now the story's getting interesting. And now Carter's back in Columbus. Mark felt cold. You think he'll come after Denzel? I think Carter spent 2 years as a fugitive, and the one loose end from Ray's murder just became visible again. Hayes stood up, his face grim. I've requested protective detail for the Millers, but it's complicated. Officially, Carter's wanted for parole violation, not murder. I can't justify round-the-clock protection without revealing why I think they're in danger. Which would expose the cover-up, and get us both killed or fired, probably in that order. Mark stood up, his mind already working through scenarios. We need leverage. Something that proves Ray was murdered. Something Carter can't make disappear. If such a thing existed, I'd have found it by now. Maybe you were looking in the wrong place. The next morning, Mark met Christine and Denzel at the precinct entrance. Christine looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes suggesting she'd slept about as much as Mark had. Denzel wanted to visit Shadow again, she explained. I tried to tell him we should wait, but... It's okay, Denzel interrupted, his cane tapping impatiently against the sidewalk. Shadow needs me. Mark noticed Christine was carrying an extra bag, a small backpack covered in dinosaur patches. She saw him looking and managed a weak smile. Denzel's been carrying this everywhere since Ray died. Won't let me touch it. It's Dad's stuff, Denzel said defensively. Important stuff. They made their way to the K-9 wing. Shadow was already alert, watching the door like he'd known they were coming. When Denzel's voice echoed down the corridor, "Hi, Shadow, I'm back," the dog's entire body relaxed. Mark watched the interaction with new eyes now, understanding what Hayes had explained. Shadow wasn't just responding to Denzel's voice. He was responding to the echo of Ray, the genetic similarity, the familiar cadence, the scent markers that told him, family, safe, home. Can I show Shadow something? Denzel asked suddenly. What do you want to show him, honey? Christine asked. Denzel fumbled with his backpack, pulling out a small device that looked like a modified smartphone attached to a portable speaker. It's Dad's old voice recorder. The police gave it back after. I saved one message. The last one he sent me. Christine's face went pale. Denzel, I didn't know you had that. You would have taken it away, Denzel said simply. But I listen to it sometimes. When I miss him too much. He held up the device. Can Shadow hear it? Maybe it'll help him remember. Mark and Christine exchanged glances. Hayes had joined them in the observation room, drawn by some instinct. I don't know if that's a good idea, Christine started, but Denzel had already pressed play. Static crackled through the speaker. Then Ray Miller's voice filled the K-9 wing, strong, warm, alive. Hey buddy, it's Dad. I know you can't see this message, but Mom will play it for you. I'm heading out on a call, but I'll be home for dinner. We'll work on your Braille homework, okay? The alphabet's getting easier, I can tell. Shadow's reaction was immediate and visceral. He lunged to his feet, ears swiveling wildly, trying to locate the source of the voice. A whine built in his throat. Desperate, confused, hopeful. I love you, Denzel. More than anything in the whole world. You're the bravest kid I know. Shadow began pacing frantically, his claws clicking rapidly against the concrete floor. Not aggressive. Searching. Looking for Ray. Expecting him to appear because that was Ray's voice, Ray's words, Ray was here. But then the message continued, and Ray's tone changed. Lower, more serious. Christine, if you're hearing this part, it means I added the private memo. The one Denzel can't hear because of the parental lock. Christine gasped. I didn't know there was more. Ray's voice continued, now stripped of the cheerful father tone, replaced by something harder. More urgent. If I don't make it back from this call, if something happens, I need you to do something for me. Find Shadow. They'll try to retire him, send him away, but don't let them. Shadow knows Denzel. He'll protect our boy. He'll recognize him. Shadow's whining intensified. He was scratching at the kennel door now, not trying to escape but trying to reach the voice, to find Ray, to understand why his partner was speaking but not appearing. Tell Shadow to protect my boy. He'll know him by scent, by voice. That dog would die for our family. Mark felt his throat tighten. Ray had known. Somehow he'd known. Christine, I need you to hear this next part clearly. Ray's voice dropped even lower, and in the background, they could hear sounds. Traffic, distant sirens, Ray moving quickly. The warehouse call I'm responding to right now. Something feels wrong. The intel's too clean, too convenient. Carter's been acting strange all week, avoiding me. If something happens to me tonight. A pause. The sound of Ray's breathing, harsh and quick. If something happens to me, it won't be an accident. The lights went out. Every light in the Columbus Police Department. Main power, emergency backups, exit signs, everything died simultaneously, plunging the building into absolute darkness. For 3 seconds, there was only shocked silence. Then Shadow began to bark, not the aggressive snarl they'd heard before, but an alarm bark, the kind trained canines used to warn their handlers of danger. And somewhere in that darkness, close enough to hear but impossible to locate, came the sound of a door opening. Someone was in the building. Someone who'd been waiting for exactly this moment. When the lights go out, the monsters don't hide anymore. They hunt. Drop a high voltage if your heart just stopped. Because in the darkness, no one is safe, and Shadow knows exactly who's coming. The darkness lasted exactly 4 seconds before emergency generators kicked in, bathing the K9 wing in blood-red light. Shadow's barking escalated into something primal, a warning that transcended species, a sound that spoke directly to the part of the human brain that still remembered being prey. Everyone stay calm, Hayes ordered, his hand already on his weapon. Jensen, get the civilians to a secure. The rest of his sentence was swallowed by the sound of gunfire from the main corridor. Not the sharp crack of a single shot, but sustained fire, semi-automatic, controlled, professional. This wasn't a random break-in. This was an assault. Go, go, go. Hayes shoved Mark toward Christine and Denzel. Get them to the safe room. 3rd floor, north wing. Don't stop for anything. Mark grabbed Christine's arm, but she was already pulling Denzel close, her body instinctively curving around her son to shield him. What's happening? We need to move. Now. Mark's training took over. His voice calm despite the adrenaline screaming through his veins. He pulled his sidearm and checked the corridor. Empty, but the gunfire was getting closer. Stay behind me. When I say run, you run. Shadow's barking reached a fever pitch. He was throwing himself against the kennel door now, the metal rattling so violently Mark worried it would give way. More gunshots. Closer. Someone screamed, a sound that cut off abruptly. Mark's radio crackled with panicked voices. Multiple hostiles, main entrance. Officer down, repeat, officer down. Breached the command center they've got access to. Static swallowed the rest. Mark. Hayes's voice cut through the chaos. They're heading to the K9 wing. You need to get them out now. But before Mark could move, the emergency lights flickered. Once. Twice. Then died completely, plunging them back into darkness. In that absolute black, Denzel's small voice cut through. Mom? I'm scared. I know, baby. I know. Christine's voice shook, but she held steady. Just hold on to me, okay? Don't let go. Mark's eyes slowly adjusted to the darkness, finding shapes by the faint glow of exit signs at the far end of the corridor. He moved forward, weapon raised. Christine and Denzel pressed close behind him. They'd made it maybe 10 feet when the door at the end of the corridor burst open. A silhouette stood framed in red emergency light, tall, broad-shouldered, holding what looked like a Glock 19 with professional ease. Nobody move, the voice said, and Mark felt his blood turn to ice. He knew that voice. Vincent Carter. The ex-cop stepped into the corridor, and the dim light revealed what 2 years as a fugitive had done to him. Carter looked like he'd aged a decade, his face gaunt, eyes hollow but sharp, the kind of predator who'd been running so long he'd forgotten how to stop. Behind him came 2 more men, both armed, both moving with military precision. "Guns on the floor," Carter ordered. "Slow. No sudden moves." Mark calculated the odds. 3 armed men against 1 cop protecting 2 civilians in a confined space. He could maybe take Carter, but the others would kill Christine and Denzel before he got a second shot. His weapon clattered to the floor. "Kick it away." He did. Carter's eyes scanned the corridor, landing on Hayes as the captain emerged from the observation room, hands raised. "Captain Hayes. Been a while." "Carter." Hayes's voice was ice. "You're making this worse. Walk away now and maybe." "Maybe what?" "Maybe I get life in prison instead of the death penalty." Carter laughed, a sound with no humor in it. "Ray Miller tried to destroy me. Tried to take everything I built. So I took everything from him. Thought that would be enough." His eyes shifted, finding Christine in the darkness. "But then I realized, Miller's legacy is still here. His wife. His." He stopped mid-sentence, his gaze dropping lower. "To Denzel." The boy stood clutching his mother's hand, white cane in the other, his blind eyes fixed on nothing and everything. He was trembling but quiet, the way children go silent when they sense predators nearby. Carter's expression changed, something cold and calculating sliding across his features. "Miller's boy," he said softly, almost reverently. "Perfect." "Don't you dare," Christine hissed, pulling Denzel behind her. "Don't you touch him." "Oh, I'm not going to hurt him," Carter said, taking a step closer. "He's my insurance policy. See, I came here to destroy the evidence. Ray's files, the recordings, anything that could tie me to his death. But this." He gestured at Denzel with his gun. "This is so much better. Ray Miller's blind son. Leverage doesn't get more valuable than that." Mark's mind raced. The safe room was 20 feet away, but they'd never make it. Carter's men had clear lines of fire. Hayes was unarmed. And Shadow. Shadow had gone silent. The sudden absence of barking was almost more terrifying than the noise had been. "You're not taking him," Mark said, positioning himself between Carter and the boy. "Officer Jensen, right?" Carter smiled. "You're new. Don't have the history with Ray that some of us do. So let me educate you. When Ray Miller came after me, he didn't just threaten my freedom. He threatened my family, my livelihood, everything I'd worked for. Said he'd make sure I rotted in prison for the rest of my life." Carter's voice hardened. "So I made sure he rotted in the ground instead." "You murdered a good cop," Hayes spat. "I eliminated a threat," Carter corrected. "And now I'm eliminating loose ends. Starting with." The lights flickered back on, not the main power, but the emergency lights, casting everything in that hellish red glow. And in that moment, everyone saw what Mark had been praying they wouldn't. Shadow's kennel door hung open, the lock mechanism twisted and broken. Damage from last night's tampering finally giving way under the dog's desperate assault. The cage was empty. "Where's the dog?" one of Carter's men asked nervously, his weapon sweeping the corridor. Shadow was gone. 70 pounds of traumatized, highly trained K9 was loose somewhere in the building, and no one knew where. Carter's jaw tightened. "Find it." "No. That animal is a liability." His men moved to search, weapons raised, but Mark could see the fear in their movements. They were criminals, not K9 handlers. They had no idea how to deal with a police dog trained for combat. "In the meantime," Carter continued, grabbing Denzel by the arm and yanking him away from Christine, "the boy comes with me." Christine screamed. Hayes lunged forward but stopped when Carter's gun swung toward him. "One more step and I put a bullet in someone," Carter warned. "Maybe the captain. Maybe Officer Jensen here. Or maybe," he pressed the muzzle against Denzel's temple, "maybe I start with the kid and work my way up." Denzel whimpered, his small body shaking. "Mom." "It's okay, baby," Christine sobbed. "It's going to be okay." But it wasn't okay. Mark could see the calculation in Carter's eyes, the recognition that Denzel was only valuable alive as leverage. The moment Carter got what he wanted, the boy would become a witness who needed eliminating. They were running out of time. Carter began backing toward the exit, dragging Denzel with him. Anyone follows me, anyone calls for backup, anyone does anything except stand there and watch, the kid dies. Mark's hands clenched into fists, useless and desperate. Hayes looked gutted. Christine was barely standing, kept upright only by Mark's hand on her shoulder. This couldn't be how it ended. Not like this. Not after everything. A low growl echoed from somewhere in the shadows. Everyone froze. Carter's eyes widened, scanning the corridor, trying to locate the source of the sound. Where is it? Where's the... The growl came again, closer now. From the darkness above them. Mark's eyes tracked upward. There, on the catwalk that ran along the ceiling of the K-9 wing, accessible through maintenance hatches, a shadow moved against deeper shadows. Amber eyes gleamed in the red emergency light. Shadow had been hunting, and he'd found his prey. Don't move, Carter warned, his gun swinging wildly between the ceiling and his hostages. I'll shoot. I'll shoot the dog, then the kid, then. Shadow didn't give him a chance to finish. The dog launched from the catwalk with the precision of a missile. 70 pounds of fury and protective instinct guided by 2 years of grief and rage finally finding a target worthy of destruction. Carter tried to turn, tried to aim, but Shadow was too fast. The impact drove Carter backward, his gun firing wild. Bullets sparking off metal railings, punching holes in walls. Denzel fell as Carter's grip released, hitting the floor hard but alive. Mark moved instantly, covering the distance in 3 strides, grabbing Denzel and pulling him to safety as Christine screamed her son's name. Shadow and Carter crashed into the far wall in a tangle of limbs and teeth and violence. The ex-cop screamed, rage or pain or both, as Shadow's jaws found his gun arm, forcing him to drop the weapon. Carter's men raised their weapons, trying to get a clear shot, but Shadow and Carter were too close together, moving too fast. Shoot the dog! Carter roared. Shoot it! One of the men fired. 3 quick shots that went wide as Shadow twisted mid-attack, using Carter's body as a shield. Hayes dove for Mark's dropped weapon. Mark shoved Denzel toward Christine. Run! Safe room, 3rd floor, go! But Christine was frozen, watching the carnage, unable to look away as Shadow tore into the man who'd murdered her husband. The second gunman found his angle and squeezed the trigger. Shadow yelped as the bullet grazed his shoulder, but he didn't let go of Carter. If anything, the pain only made him more vicious. Then Carter did something desperate. His free hand found a backup weapon strapped to his ankle, a snub-nose revolver Mark hadn't seen. Shadow N.O. Mark screamed, but Shadow had already seen it. The dog released Carter's arm and lunged for the gun, jaws clamping down on Carter's wrist just as the ex-cop pulled the trigger. The shot went high, missing Shadow by inches, and hitting one of Carter's own men in the chest. The man dropped, his weapon clattering away. Chaos erupted. Hayes fired at the remaining gunman, forcing him into cover. Mark dragged Christine and Denzel toward the exit as bullets tore through the air around them. Shadow held on to Carter with desperate strength, shaking his head violently, trying to disarm him, trying to end him. Carter's finger found the trigger again. He pressed the barrel against Shadow's ribcage, point-blank range, nowhere to miss, and smiled through bloodied teeth. Just like your partner, he hissed. The gunshot was deafening in the enclosed space. Denzel screamed. Shadow! The dog and the man fell together in a heap, neither moving. For a heartbeat, the world went silent. Then Shadow stirred, slowly, painfully, but alive. The bullet had missed his vitals by centimeters, gouging a deep furrow along his ribs but not penetrating. Carter, however, lay perfectly still. His backup weapon had fallen from nerveless fingers. Shadow stood over him, blood dripping from his muzzle and his side, legs trembling but steady. His amber eyes found Denzel across the corridor. And then he took a step forward, protective, purposeful, placing himself between the boy and the remaining threats. The last gunman, seeing his employer down and a blood-covered German shepherd advancing, dropped his weapon and raised his hands. I surrender, he gasped. Don't let that thing kill me. Hayes kept his weapon trained on him. On the ground. Now. As the man complied, Mark finally allowed himself to breathe. They were alive. Somehow, impossibly, they were. Carter's eyes opened. His hand shot out, grabbing the dropped revolver. His movements jerky but determined. The barrel swung toward Denzel, still clutched in Christine's arms 20 feet away. "If I'm going down," Carter rasped, blood bubbling from his lips. "Miller's legacy dies with me." He cocked the weapon. Shadow, fully unleashed, stepped out of the shadows between Carter and his target. Teeth bared, eyes locked on the ex-cop's throat, every muscle coiled for one final attack. Their eyes met, the man who'd murdered Ray Miller, and the dog who'd loved him. Carter's finger began to squeeze the trigger. Shadow lunged. In the space between heartbeats, everything can change. Drop a fire if you held your breath through that entire chapter, because the next one will either break your heart or put it back together. Maybe both. Shadow's lunge was pure instinct and purpose. 70 pounds of muscle and fury launched through air thick with gunpowder and terror. Carter's finger squeezed the trigger. The gunshot was deafening. But Shadow was faster. The bullet meant for Denzel's head caught Shadow in the shoulder instead, spinning him mid-leap. He crashed into Carter with reduced force but enough momentum to send the revolver skittering across blood-slicked tiles. "No!" Christine's scream tore through the chaos as she pulled Denzel tighter against her chest. Shadow hit the ground hard, his injured shoulder buckling, but he scrambled upright immediately. Teeth bared, eyes wild, operating on something beyond pain or reason. This was the dog Ray Miller had trained for combat. The K-9 who'd taken down armed suspects and dragged children from burning buildings. The hero everyone thought was dead. Carter tried to crawl toward the fallen weapon, his own injuries slowing him. Someone shoot that animal. The remaining gunman, hands still raised, weapon on the ground, took one look at Shadow's blood-matted fur and Predator's eyes and pressed himself flatter against the wall. "I'm not paid enough for this." Hayes kept his weapon trained on the man. Smart choice. Shadow advanced on Carter, each step deliberate despite the blood dripping from his shoulder and ribs. His growl was low, continuous, the sound of a promise being kept. Protect the boy. No matter what. Carter's back hit the wall. For the first time, real fear flickered across his face, the recognition that he was trapped with something he couldn't bargain with or intimidate. "Call him off," he rasped at Hayes. "Call him off or I swear." Shadow lunged again. This time, Carter's scream was pure animal terror as Shadow's jaws clamped down on his gun arm. The same arm that had pulled the trigger 2 years ago in that warehouse, the same hand that had set explosives meant to murder Ray Miller. The sound of sirens finally penetrated the building. Backup arriving, too late to prevent the carnage but in time to witness its aftermath. Shadow out. Hayes commanded, using the release word he'd found in Shadow's training file. Shadow didn't respond. His jaws tightened, shaking his head violently, and Carter's screams intensified. "Shadow, please." Mark tried. Nothing. The dog was beyond commands now, operating on 2 years of compressed grief and rage, finally finding an outlet worthy of their intensity. Every ounce of pain from Ray's death, every moment of isolation and confusion and trauma, all of it channeled into this single act of protection and vengeance. Then Denzel's voice cut through the chaos, small and terrified and familiar. "Shadow, it's okay. You can stop now." The effect was instantaneous. Shadow's jaws loosened, not releasing completely, but the violent shaking stopped. His amber eyes found Denzel across the corridor, and something in that gaze shifted from feral to aware. "He can't hurt us anymore," Denzel continued, tears streaming down his face. "You saved me. You can stop." Shadow released Carter's arm and took 2 unsteady steps toward Denzel before his legs gave out. He collapsed onto the blood-stained tiles, his breathing harsh and labored, adrenaline finally giving way to the reality of his injuries. "Shadow." Denzel pulled away from Christine, his hands outstretched, white cane forgotten. "Denzel, no." Christine tried to grab him, but the boy was already moving, his muscle memory and spatial awareness guiding him unerringly toward the wounded dog. He dropped to his knees beside Shadow, his small hands finding for matted with blood. "You're okay. You're gonna be okay." Shadow's tail gave a single weak thump against the floor. Mark's radio erupted with voices. Sweat entering now. Need EMTs, multiple casualties. K9 unit is down. Repeat, K9 is down. Boots thundered through the corridor as tactical officers swarmed in, weapons drawn, securing the scene. Medics followed close behind, their practiced eyes scanning for the wounded. We need a vet, Mark shouted. The dog needs immediate medical attention. One of the EMTs, a young woman with Rodriguez on her name tag, knelt beside Shadow. Jesus, he's bleeding from multiple wounds. Shoulder, ribs, looks like. She probed gently and Shadow whined. Bullet grazed his ribcage, another one embedded in his shoulder. He needs surgery. Then get him to surgery, Christine said fiercely, one arm around Denzel, the other reaching out to touch Shadow's head. Whatever it costs, whatever it takes, save him. Rodriguez looked up at Hayes. Captain. Hayes nodded. Do it. Emergency authorization. This dog's a hero. As the medical team prepared to move Shadow, Denzel refused to let go. His fingers were buried in Shadow's fur. His face pressed against the dog's neck, sobbing. Please don't leave me. Please. Everyone leaves. Dad left. My eyes left. Please don't go. Shadow's tongue found Denzel's cheek, a single gentle lick that said I'm here, I'm still here, before the sedative Rodriguez had administered began to take effect. The dog's eyes started to close, his breathing evening out. We need to move him now, Rodriguez said gently. Kid, you did good, but we have to get him to the vet clinic. Mark carefully pried Denzel's fingers from Shadow's fur. He's going to be okay. They're going to fix him. Promise. Mark looked at Shadow's injuries, the bullet wounds, the blood loss, the trauma, and wanted to make that promise so badly it hurt. But he was a cop, trained to deal in evidence and facts, not false hope. I promise we'll do everything we can, he said instead. Two officers lifted Shadow onto a stretcher, moving quickly but carefully. As they carried him toward the exit, Shadow's eyes opened one more time, finding Denzel's face in the crowd. Their gazes held for a heartbeat. Then Shadow was gone, rushed toward emergency surgery with sirens wailing and medics shouting coordinates. The K9 wing fell into eerie quiet, broken only by Carter's groans as EMTs worked on his mangled arm and the steady drip of blood hitting tile. Hayes holstered his weapon and surveyed the carnage. 3 men down, 1 dead from friendly fire, 1 surrendered, and Carter himself barely conscious. Bullet holes pocked the walls. Emergency lights still painted everything red. And in the middle of it all, a blind 8-year-old boy stood with his mother's arms around him, crying for a dog who'd nearly died protecting him. Get statements from everyone, Hayes ordered the arriving officers. Secure the scene. And somebody get me Deputy Chief Warren. He's going to want to know about this. As officers moved to comply, Mark knelt beside Denzel. Hey, buddy. You were really brave. I wasn't brave, Denzel whispered. I was scared. Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do what needs to be done even when you're terrified. Mark squeezed the boy's shoulder. Shadow knew that. Your dad knew that. Now you know it too. Christine looked at Mark with red-rimmed eyes. Is he really going to be okay? Shadow's tough, Mark said, though uncertainty gnawed at him. He survived losing Ray. Survived 2 years of everyone giving up on him. He'll survive this. He had to. Because if Shadow died after finally finding his family again, after remembering what he was meant to protect, the universe was crueler than Mark wanted to believe. Across the corridor, Carter was being loaded onto a stretcher, his destroyed arm immobilized, his face gray with shock and blood loss. Hayes stood over him, expression hard. Vincent Carter, you're under arrest for the murder of Officer Ray Miller, attempted murder of civilians, assault on police officers, and about 15 other charges I'm going to enjoy listing. Hayes leaned closer. You're going to rot in prison for the rest of your miserable life. And every day you're in there, I want you to remember the blind kid and the dog you couldn't kill. Carter's eyes flickered with something. Rage or fear or bitter acceptance. Ray Miller's still dead, he rasped. I still won that fight. No, Hayes said quietly. You didn't. Because Ray's legacy isn't in the ground with him. It's standing right there, he gestured at Denzel. And it just saved everyone in this building. You killed a good cop. But his son and his dog made sure you'd answer for it. As Carter was wheeled away under armed guard, Mark's phone buzzed. The vet clinic. His heart hammered as he answered. Jensen. Officer. This is Dr. Keller at Columbus Emergency Veterinary. We've got your K9 in surgery now. It's not good. Multiple gunshot wounds, significant blood loss, possible internal damage. We're doing everything we can, but you should prepare the family for. Don't say it, Mark interrupted. Don't say he might not make it. That dog has survived worse. He'll survive this. A pause. We'll do our best. But the next few hours are critical. If you want to be here when he comes out of surgery. We'll be there, Mark said, already moving toward Christine and Denzel. Keep him alive. Document whatever it takes. He hung up and met Christine's questioning gaze. They're operating now, he said. We should go. Be there when he wakes up. If he wakes up, Mark thought but didn't say. They made their way through the precinct, past crime scene techs and investigators, past the evidence room that had been breached, past all the carnage Vincent Carter had left in his wake. As they emerged into daylight, Denzel turned his face toward the sun, toward a world he couldn't see but could still feel. Shadow's going to be okay, the boy said with absolute certainty. He promised. When did he promise? Christine asked gently. Just now. When he licked my face. That was a promise. Denzel's fingers found his father's badge, which he'd somehow kept in his pocket through everything. Dad promised he'd come home, and he couldn't keep it. But Shadow keeps his promises. Mark hoped desperately that the boy was right. The surgery took 6 hours. Mark, Christine, and Denzel waited in the veterinary clinic's sparse waiting room, surrounded by pet owners with routine concerns who cast curious glances at the blood-stained, exhausted trio in the corner. Hayes arrived at hour 3 with coffee and updates. Carter's in custody, singing like a canary. Gave up his accomplices, his cartel contacts, everything. He knows he's done. The DA's building a case that'll put him away for life. And Ray? Christine asked quietly. What about justice for Ray? IA is reopening the investigation. With Carter's confession and the evidence we've recovered, they'll officially reclassify Ray's death as murder. He'll get the memorial he deserves, a hero who died exposing corruption, not a victim of bad luck. Christine's eyes filled with tears. Thank you. Don't thank me. Thank your son and that stubborn dog. Hayes looked at Denzel, who sat perfectly still, listening to everything. They're the ones who wouldn't let Ray's story end. At hour 5, a young nurse came out. The Miller family. They all stood. Shadow's out of surgery. Dr. Keller will be out shortly to explain. Is he alive? Denzel interrupted. The nurse smiled. He's alive. The relief was physical, dropping Mark back into his chair like strings had been cut. But the nurse's expression turned serious. However, there were complications. You'll need to speak with Dr. Keller about. The operating room doors opened. Dr. Keller emerged, still in surgical scrubs, her face tired but professional. She pulled off her gloves as she approached. Shadow made it through surgery, she began, and Mark felt the but coming before she said it. We removed 2 bullets, repaired damaged tissue, and stabilized him. But there it was. The trauma to his shoulder was severe. There's nerve damage. Even with physical therapy, he may never regain full mobility in his front left leg. She paused. He'll live, but his days as a working K9 are over. The words should have been devastating. Instead, they felt like a gift. Shadow would live. Damaged, scarred, never the same, but alive. Can we see him? Denzel asked. He's in recovery, still sedated. But in a few hours, once he's stable, I can allow brief visits. Dr. Keller's expression softened. That dog fought like hell to stay alive. I've seen a lot of animals in my 20 years doing this, but I've never seen one fight that hard. She looked at Denzel. He must have something worth living for. He does, Denzel said simply. He has me. And I have him. 3 hours later, they were allowed into the recovery room. Shadow lay on a padded table, bandages wrapped around his shoulder and ribcage, for lines running from his leg. His breathing was steady but shallow, and his eyes were closed. Denzel approached slowly, his cane finding the edge of the table. Shadow. It's me. Shadow's eyes opened. Groggy, unfocused, but aware. His tail thumped once against the padding. Denzel's hand found Shadow's head, his fingers gentle against the dog's ears. You kept your promise. You saved me. Shadow's tongue found Denzel's palm, weak but deliberate. The doctor says you're going to be okay, Denzel continued. You'll have a scar like mine. He touched his own eyes, blind but seeing in ways that mattered more. We match now. Christine stood beside her son, her hand resting on Shadow's uninjured side. Thank you, she whispered to the dog. Thank you for protecting him. Thank you for remembering. Mark watched from the doorway as the broken pieces of Ray Miller's family finally found each other again. Widow, son, and the loyal K-9 who'd never stopped mourning his lost partner. It wasn't the family Ray had left behind, but it was the family that had survived. And sometimes survival was its own kind of victory. The recovery room door opened behind Mark. A technician entered, clipboard in hand, moving toward the medication station. Excuse me, Mark said, stepping aside. The technician nodded and walked past, but something made Mark pause. A scent. Familiar but wrong. Gun oil. Fresh. Mark's hand went to his empty holster. His weapon still in evidence from the shooting. His eyes tracked the technician's movements. The man reached under his scrubs. Down. Mark shouted. The technician spun, pulling a compact pistol from a hidden holster, his face twisting from neutral to vicious in a heartbeat. Not a technician. One of Carter's men. The one who'd escaped in the chaos. And his weapon was aimed directly at Denzel. The shot rang out. Denzel screamed Shadow's name. Blood spread across the white tiles in a crimson pool. But the gunman was the one on the ground, staring up in horror. Shadow stood on the operating table, his fore ripped free, bandages splitting, barely able to stand on 3 legs, but standing. And in his jaws, clamped with the last of his strength, was the gunman's wrist. The pistol lay on the floor, untouched. Shadow had heard the threat, smelled the danger. And despite surgery, despite pain, despite everything, he'd moved. One last time. To protect his boy. Some promises are stronger than pain, deeper than trauma, and more powerful than death itself. Drop a blue heart if this chapter broke you, because we're not done yet. The truth is about to come out and it changes everything. Shadow collapsed back onto the operating table, his strength finally spent. The gunman writhed on the floor, clutching his mangled wrist and screaming as Mark kicked the pistol away and pressed his knee into the man's back. Don't move. Don't even breathe. Mark's voice was pure fury as he wrenched the man's arms behind him. Hayes, we've got another one. The captain burst through the door, weapon drawn, taking in the scene with sharp eyes. Within seconds, backup flooded the recovery room, real officers this time, verified and secured. Dr. Keller rushed to Shadow, her face pale. Get him stabilized. His sutures are torn, he's bleeding again. We need to get him back into surgery now. Her team moved with practiced efficiency, prepping Shadow for emergency transport. The dog's eyes were half closed, his breathing shallow, but as Denzel's trembling hand found his head, Shadow's tail gave one faint wag. You keep saving me, Denzel whispered, tears streaming down his face. Why do you keep saving me? Because that's what I was born to do, Shadow's eyes seemed to say. Because your father asked me to. Because you're mine to protect. Clear the room. Dr. Keller ordered as they wheeled Shadow toward the surgical suite. Family only in the waiting area, everyone else out. The precinct officers hauled the would-be assassin away, his screams echoing down the corridor. Hayes stayed behind, his face grave as he holstered his weapon. That's 3 of Carter's men we've arrested, he said. How many more are out there? Doesn't matter, Mark said, his voice hard. We end this now. Tonight. I want Carter in an interrogation room, and I want answers. Hayes nodded. Agreed. But first, he looked at Christine and Denzel, both visibly shaken. We make sure they're safe. I'm putting them in protective custody until we've rounded up every last one of Carter's associates. No, Christine said firmly. We're not hiding anymore. Ray didn't hide from the truth, and neither will we. We're staying right here until Shadow comes out of that surgery. Mrs. Miller. My son almost died. Twice. That dog has taken bullets for him. We're not leaving. Her voice cracked but held steady. We're not leaving him alone. Hayes looked like he wanted to argue, but something in Christine's expression, grief and steel in equal measure, made him nod instead. I'll post guards. Armed. No one gets in or out without clearance. As he made the arrangements, Denzel's hand fumbled for his white cane, which had fallen during the chaos. His fingers found it, lifted it, and the modified device attached to the handle activated, Ray Miller's voice suddenly filling the recovery room with startling clarity. Final message. If you're hearing this, it means something went wrong. It means I didn't make it back from the warehouse. Everyone froze. Christine gasped. That's the full recording. The one I couldn't access. I've spent 8 months building a case against corruption in the Columbus PD. What I've found goes deeper than I thought. Officers on the cartel payroll. Evidence being buried. Good cops being silenced. Ray's voice was steady but urgent, the sound of a man who knew he might not survive to tell this story himself. The warehouse call tonight, the anonymous tip about hostages, it's too convenient. Too clean. Someone wanted me at that location, and I have a pretty good idea who. Mark felt his chest tighten. This was it. The proof they'd been searching for. Vincent Carter is dirty. I've documented his meetings with Moreno cartel contacts, traced money transfers, recorded conversations. But Carter's not working alone. There's someone higher up protecting him. Someone with enough authority to bury investigations and eliminate threats. Hayes's face had gone pale. Ray, what did you find? As if answering, Ray's voice continued. I suspect, no, I'm certain, that there's a ranking officer involved. Someone who's been feeding Carter information, helping him stay ahead of internal affairs. I haven't confirmed the identity yet, but I'm close. So close that they're getting desperate. A pause. The sound of Ray breathing hard, moving quickly. Shadow, if you're hearing this somehow, if someone plays this for you, know that I loved you, partner. You were the best K9 I ever worked with. The best friend I ever had. Shadow, being wheeled toward surgery, whined, a sound that cut through everyone present like a knife. And if I'm gone, protect my boy. Protect Denzel. He's going to need you more than ever. You'll know him by his voice, by his scent. He's just a little kid now, but he's brave. So brave. Be there for him the way you were there for me. Denzel's sob echoed through the room. Christine pulled him close, both of them crying openly. Christine, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I couldn't be more careful, couldn't wait for backup, couldn't. Ray's voice cracked. I love you. I love Denzel. I'm sorry I broke my promise. The recording crackled with static, then Ray's voice returned. Harder now, more urgent. To whoever finds this, trust Captain Hayes. He's clean. He's one of the good ones. But don't trust. Another pause, longer this time. When Ray spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. Don't trust Deputy Chief Warren. The name hit like a physical blow. Mark's head snapped up. Hayes went rigid. And in the doorway where he'd just arrived to check on the situation, stood Deputy Chief Warren himself, still in uniform, hand resting casually on his service weapon. Their eyes met. Warren's expression shifted from concerned superior to something cold and calculating. Well, he said softly. That's unfortunate. Ray's recording continued, unaware of the drama unfolding. Warren's been Carter's protector from the start. I found communication records between them, evidence of Warren warning Carter about investigations. helping him avoid surveillance. Warren's the one with enough authority to make evidence disappear, to shut down IA inquiries, too. Turn it off, Warren ordered, his hand now gripping his weapon but not yet drawing it. No one moved. If something happens to me tonight, it won't be an accident. It'll be murder. And Warren will help cover it up, just like he's covered up everything else. I said, turn it off. Warren's voice rose, his composure cracking. Hayes's hand moved to his own weapon. Slow, deliberate. Don't do this, Tom. Don't make this worse than it already is. Worse. Warren laughed, a sound with no humor in it. You want to talk about worse? Ray Miller was a crusader who didn't understand how the real world works. You take money where you can get it, you protect your own, and you eliminate problems before they eliminate you. Mark positioned himself between Warren and Denzel, his mind racing. Warren was armed, had authority, and probably had more backup than they knew about. But Ray's recording was playing for everyone to hear. Officers in the hallway, medical staff, witnesses everywhere. The truth was out. Ray's voice concluded. Shadow. If I'm gone, protect my boy. Trust Hayes. Don't trust Warren. Don't trust Carter. And whatever happens, whatever they try to bury or cover up, make sure the truth comes out. Make sure my death means something. The recording clicked off, leaving heavy silence. Warren's smile was predatory. You really want to do this here? In front of civilians? In front of a child? His eyes swept the room, calculating odds. Hayes, you draw that weapon and this becomes a bloodbath. Is that what you want? All these witnesses caught in crossfire. It's over, Tom, Hayes said, his voice steady despite the weapon now fully drawn and aimed at his superior. You're done. We have Ray's testimony. We have Carter in custody. And he's already started talking. We have evidence, witnesses, everything we need to prove you helped murder a good cop. Carter's word against mine? A fugitive felon against a decorated officer with 30 years of service. Warren shook his head. I'll be fine. But you? Drawing down on a superior officer? That's career suicide, Lawrence. Maybe, Hayes acknowledged. But some things are worth more than a career. In the hallway, tactical officers had gathered, drawn by the commotion, weapons ready, but frozen in uncertainty. Their deputy chief was in a standoff with their captain. Nobody knew whose orders to follow. Warren noticed them too. Officers. Stand down. Captain Hayes has suffered a mental break. I'm ordering. Nobody moves. Mark shouted. Warren is under investigation for conspiracy to commit murder. He helped Vincent Carter kill Officer Ray Miller 2 years ago. That's insane. Warren's composure slipped further. I'm the deputy chief of police. You're taking the word of a dead cop's paranoid recording over. Shadow's howl cut through his words. From the surgical suite, through closed doors and walls, came a sound that made everyone's blood run cold. Not pain. Not fear. Recognition. Shadow went berserk whenever Warren visited the K-9 facility, Mark said, the pieces clicking into place. We thought he was just aggressive toward everyone. But he wasn't. He smelled Warren. He knew. He was there that night and he knew. Warren's hand tightened on his weapon. You're all making a terrible mistake. The only mistake, Hayes interrupted, was thinking we wouldn't figure it out. Hands up, Tom. Slowly. Don't make me shoot you. For a long moment, Warren stood perfectly still. Mark could see him calculating. The number of officers present, the witnesses, the recording that had damned him, the odds of fighting his way out. Then Warren smiled. Cold, resigned, vicious. You know what the funny thing is, he said conversationally. Ray Miller was a good cop. Maybe the best I ever worked with. That's why he had to die. Good cops ask too many questions, dig too deep, care too much. His hand moved toward his holster, not quickly but deliberately. Bad cops. We survive. Tom, don't, Hayes warned. Warren drew his weapon. 3 things happened simultaneously. Hayes fired, his shot precise and controlled. hitting Warren's shoulder and spinning him backward. Christine screamed, covering Denzel with her body. And from the surgical suite, Shadow's heart rate monitor began to flatline. A steady, endless tone that meant his damaged heart had finally given out. Warren hit the ground, his weapon clattering away. Tactical officers swarmed him, securing his arms, calling for medical assistance. But Mark was already running toward the surgical suite, his heart in his throat, because Shadow couldn't die. Not now, not after everything, not after completing Ray's final command. Dr. Keller met him at the door, her face stricken. He coded, "We're trying to resuscitate, but—" "Don't stop," Mark ordered. "Don't you dare stop." Through the window, he could see the surgical team working frantically. Chest compressions, medications, desperate measures to restart a heart that had been through too much. The monitor remained flat. That terrible, endless tone. Denzel appeared at Mark's side, Christine right behind him. "Shadow." The boy called. "Shadow, please. Please don't go." Inside the surgical suite, Dr. Keller prepared the defibrillator. "Clear." Shadow's body jerked with the shock. The monitor stayed flat. Again, Dr. Keller ordered, "Clear." Another shock. Another flat line. "Come on," Mark whispered. "Come on, you stubborn dog. You've got a family waiting for you. You've got a promise to keep." Dr. Keller looked at her team, defeat creeping into her expression. "One more. If this doesn't work—" "It'll work," Denzel said with absolute conviction. "He's not done yet. Dad asked him to protect me. He always keeps his promises." "Clear." The shock arced through Shadow's body. The monitor blipped. Once. Everyone froze. Another blip. Then another. Weak but steady. Shadow's back leg gave a single, faint kick, the kind of movement dogs make when they're dreaming. Or answering a command. "Protect my boy." The monitor settled into a rhythm. Irregular, but alive. Dr. Keller's shoulders sagged with relief. "He's back. He's actually back." Denzel pressed his face against the window. "I told you. He keeps his promises." In the corridor, Warren was being loaded onto a stretcher. His shoulder bandaged, his hands cuffed. Hayes stood over him, his weapon still drawn, his face carved from stone. "Ray Miller's death is officially reclassified as murder," Hayes said. "You're under arrest for conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and accessory to homicide. You're done, Tom. It's over." Warren's laugh was bitter, pained. "You think this ends with me? You think I'm the only one?" He coughed, blood on his lips. "There are others. Higher up. Deeper in." Ray barely scratched the surface. "Then we'll find them too," Hayes said. "One by one. Starting with everyone you protected." As Warren was wheeled away, Hayes turned to find Mark, Christine, and Denzel watching through the surgical suite window. Watching Shadow fight to stay alive, to keep his promise, to protect the boy his handler had loved. Ray Miller's voice echoed in Hayes's memory. "Make sure my death means something." It had. Ray's final message had exposed the corruption that killed him. Ray's dog had protected his son against impossible odds. Ray's family had refused to let the truth be buried. Some promises, Hayes realized, were stronger than death. The surgical suite door opened. Dr. Keller emerged, exhausted but smiling. "He's stable," she said. "Critical but stable. The next 24 hours are crucial, but if he makes it through tonight." She trailed off, then looked at Denzel. "He heard you. I don't know how, but when you called to him, his heart rate responded. You brought him back. Can I see him?" Denzel asked. "Brief visits only. He needs rest." They let Denzel in first, just him with Christine watching from the doorway. The boy approached Shadow's table slowly, his hand finding the dog's head with practiced ease. Shadow's eyes opened. Barely, just slits, but aware. "You did it," Denzel whispered. "You protected me. Just like Dad asked. Just like you promised." He leaned closer. "Now you have to do one more thing, okay? You have to get better. You have to stay. Because I need you. And you need me. We need each other." Shadow's tail moved. Just a fraction, but enough. In the hallway, Hayes's phone rang. He answered, listened, then looked at Mark with something like hope. That was the DA, he said. Based on Ray's recording and Warren's arrest, they're reopening every case Warren touched in the last 5 years. Every conviction, every closed investigation, everything. If there are others involved like Warren claimed, we'll find them. Ray would be proud, Mark said. Ray would be home with his family, Hayes corrected. But yeah, he'd be proud that we finally got it right. Through the surgical suite window, they watched Denzel and Shadow. Boy and dog, both scarred, both surviving, both refusing to let grief win. Ray Miller's legacy lived on in them. And somewhere, in whatever comes after, Ray knew his final command had been heard and obeyed. Protect my boy. Mission accomplished. Justice has a long memory, and the truth always finds a way. Drop a balance scale if you're ready for the finals, because after everything they've survived, Denzel and Shadow still have one more miracle waiting for them. 3 months later. The morning sun filtered through the windows of Christine Miller's kitchen, casting golden light across the linoleum floor where Shadow lay, his head resting on crossed paws. The scars were visible now, thick lines of fur that had grown back white instead of black across his shoulder and ribcage, a permanent reminder of the bullets he'd taken and survived. But the eyes were different. Gone was the feral wildness, the constant vigilance that had made him seem more predator than companion. In its place was something calmer, deeper, the look of a dog who'd found his purpose again and had no intention of losing it. Denzel sat at the table, working through his breakfast with the methodical precision of someone who'd learned to navigate a sightless world. His fingers found the glass of orange juice, the plate of eggs, the fork, each item exactly where Christine had placed it, in the configuration they'd practiced 1,000 times. You ready for today? Christine asked, pouring herself coffee with hands that no longer shook when she thought about that day at the precinct. Therapy helped. Time helped more. But mostly, having Shadow in the house, Ray's partner, Ray's legacy, alive and protective and present, had given her something she'd lost 2 years ago, peace. I'm ready, Denzel said, though his voice held a tremor of nervousness. Today was the ceremony. The day Ray Miller's name would be officially cleared, his death reclassified as murder, his sacrifice recognized for what it truly was, a hero's last stand against corruption. And today was the day Shadow would receive his commendation. The Medal of Valor for saving Denzel's life multiple times and exposing the conspiracy that had killed his handler. Shadow's ready too, Christine said, reaching down to scratch behind the dog's ears. Shadow's tail thumped against the floor, a sound that had become as familiar and comforting as a heartbeat. The training had started small. Just simple commands at first, testing whether Shadow's aggression would return now that his injuries had healed. But with Denzel present, Shadow was a different dog. Focused, obedient, gentle in ways the precinct officers had thought impossible. Mark Jensen had been the one to suggest it. 2 weeks after Shadow's release from the vet clinic. What if we train him as Denzel's service dog? He'd asked Christine over coffee in the hospital cafeteria, where they'd both spent too many hours waiting for surgery updates. Shadow's already protective of him. With proper training, he could be both a guide dog and a protection animal. Christine had been skeptical. He's a police K9. Combat trained. I don't know if... He's Ray's dog, Mark interrupted gently. And Ray loved that boy more than anything. Shadow knows it. You saw how he reacted when Denzel was in danger. That dog would walk through fire for him. So they'd tried. The first session had been simple. Teaching Shadow to walk at Denzel's pace, to stop at curbs, to alert for obstacles. The K9 trainer they'd hired, a woman named Rodriguez who'd worked with PTSD service dogs for veterans, had been amazed at how quickly Shadow adapted. It's like he already knows what to do, she'd said, watching Shadow guide Denzel around a practice course. Like he's been waiting for this. Maybe he had been. Over the following months, Shadow learned to be Denzel's eyes. He guided the boy through crowded hallways at school, stopped him before stairs, positioned himself as a buffer between Denzel and potential threats. But more than that, more than the practical skills, Shadow had become Denzel's anchor, his constant, his proof that not everything he loved would disappear. The ceremony was held at Columbus Police Department headquarters, in the main assembly hall where officers gathered for briefings and awards. Media packed the back rows. This story had gone viral weeks ago. The blind boy and the traumatized K-9 who'd saved each other. Denzel sat in the front row between Christine and Mark, his hand resting on Shadow's head. The dog sat at perfect attention, wearing a formal K-9 vest that read, "Service dog, do not distract." Captain Hayes stood at the podium, his dress uniform crisp, his voice carrying across the crowded room. 2 years ago, we lost one of our finest officers. Ray Miller was killed in what we believed was a tragic accident. Wrong place, wrong time, a casualty of the job we all signed up for. He paused, letting the weight settle. But Ray's death wasn't an accident. It was murder. A conspiracy orchestrated by men who'd sworn to uphold the law but chose instead to profit from breaking it. Ray died because he refused to look away from corruption. Because he believed in justice, even when it cost him everything. Hayes's eyes found Christine in the crowd. Thanks to Ray's foresight, to his final message and the loyalty of his K-9 partner, that conspiracy has been exposed. Deputy Chief Thomas Warren is currently serving a life sentence for his role in Ray's murder. Vincent Carter and his associates will never see freedom again. And 12 other officers connected to the corruption ring have been arrested or are under investigation. Applause rippled through the room, but Hayes raised his hand for silence. Today, we honor 2 individuals who made that justice possible. First, Officer Ray Miller, posthumously promoted to detective and awarded the Medal of Honor for his sacrifice. An officer carried out a shadow box containing Ray's badge, his medal, and a photograph of him in uniform with Shadow at his side. Christine accepted it with trembling hands, tears streaming freely down her face. And second, Hayes continued, K-9 Shadow, who despite suffering severe trauma, protected Detective Miller's son against multiple threats and helped expose the truth about his handler's death. Shadow was called forward. Denzel stood, his hand on the dog's harness, and together they approached the podium. Hayes knelt, pinning the Medal of Valor to Shadow's vest. This dog was labeled aggressive, unfit for duty, marked for euthanasia. Hayes's voice thickened with emotion. But nobody could calm this aggressive police dog until the one person who couldn't see him truly saw him. Saw past the trauma and the fear to the loyal heart beneath. Saw what everyone else had missed, that Shadow wasn't broken. He was grieving. And all he needed was someone who understood. Hayes looked at Denzel. You saved him, son. Just like he saved you. Denzel's voice was small but steady. He saved me first. I just gave him a reason to keep going. The room erupted in applause. Cameras flashed. Officers who'd seen Shadow at his worst, snarling, violent, dangerous, now watched him sit calmly beside an 8-year-old blind boy, the picture of devotion. After the ceremony, people swarmed them with questions and congratulations. Denzel handled it with shy grace, his hand never leaving Shadow's fur. The dog endured the attention with patience, but his eyes constantly tracked exits and potential threats. Old habits died hard. Mark found them near the refreshment table, where Denzel was attempting to navigate juice and cookies without making a mess. Shadow stood at his side, occasionally nudging Denzel's hand when he was about to knock something over. You two did good up there, Mark said. Thanks. Denzel smiled. Shadow did all the hard parts. I just stood there. Don't sell yourself short. You're the reason this whole thing came together. Your dad would be, Mark's voice caught. He'd be so proud. Do you think he knows? Denzel asked quietly. Wherever he is. Do you think he knows Shadow kept his promise? Mark knelt down to Denzel's level. Yeah, buddy. I think he knows. They left as the sun was setting, declining offers for rides in favor of walking the 6 blocks to their house. Christine had been nervous about it at first. What if Carter had more associates they hadn't found? What if Warren's conspiracy went even deeper? But Hayes had assured her, we've dismantled the entire network. You're safe. And besides, he gestured at Shadow, that dog's not letting anything happen to your boy. So they walked. Denzel's cane tapped a rhythm against the sidewalk, but he didn't really need it anymore. Not with Shadow there. The dog moved at Denzel's pace, stopping at every curb, guiding him around obstacles before the cane ever detected them. "We're a team now," Denzel said happily, his free hand tangled in Shadow's harness. "Right, Shadow. You and me." Shadow's tail wagged in response. Christine walked a few steps behind, watching them with a mixture of joy and bittersweet grief. This was what Ray had wanted. His son safe, protected, loved. But God, she wished Ray were here to see it. To see how Shadow had stepped into the role Ray could no longer fill. They were half a block from home when Denzel stumbled over an uneven piece of sidewalk his cane had missed. Shadow moved instantly, his body blocking Denzel's fall, his shoulder providing support as the boy caught his balance. "Thanks." Denzel laughed, steadying himself. "What would I do without you?" Shadow's answer was a gentle nudge against Denzel's leg. "I'm here. I've got you. Always." They started walking again, Denzel chattering about school and his upcoming science project and whether they could convince Mom to let Shadow come to the class presentation. Christine smiled, starting to relax. Shadow stopped. Mid-step, mid-breath, every muscle in his body going tense. His ears swiveled forward, locked on something ahead. A low growl built in his chest. Not aggressive but warning. Threat. Danger. Be ready. Denzel felt the change immediately through the harness. "Shadow. What's wrong?" Christine's hand went to her phone, ready to dial 911. "What is it, boy? What do you?" Then she saw him. Across the street, partially hidden in the shadows of a building's overhang, stood a figure. Man-shaped, still, watching them with an intensity that made Christine's skin crawl. Not moving. Not approaching. Just watching. Shadow's growl intensified. His body shifted, placing himself more firmly between Denzel and the figure. "Mom." Denzel's voice was small, scared. "Is someone there?" "I don't know," Christine whispered, pulling out her phone. "But we're not taking chances." Hayes said if anything felt wrong. The figure moved. Not toward them, that would have been almost better, more straightforward. Instead, he turned and walked away, disappearing into an alley between buildings. But just before he vanished, streetlight caught his face for a fraction of a second. Christine's blood ran cold. She knew that face. From news reports, from wanted posters, from nightmares she'd been having since Ray's death. Lieutenant James Reeves. Warren's second in command. The man who'd disappeared the day Warren was arrested. The man they'd never been able to find. Shadow's hackles were raised. His entire body coiled to spring. He knew that scent. Remembered it from somewhere. The precinct? The warehouse. Somewhere in the chaos of the past 2 years, Shadow had encountered Reeves. And judged him a threat. Christine grabbed Denzel's hand. "We need to go. Now." They hurried the last block home, Shadow maintaining his protective position, his eyes constantly scanning. Once inside, Christine locked every door, closed every curtain, and called Captain Hayes. "We saw Reeves," she said without preamble. "Outside our house. Watching us." A pause. Then Hayes's voice, tight with controlled fury. "Stay inside. I'm sending units now. We'll find him." But as Christine looked out the window at the darkening street, at the shadows that seemed to hold too many secrets, she knew Reeves wasn't done. Warren had said it in the hospital. "You think this ends with me? There are others. Higher up. Deeper in." They'd exposed the conspiracy. But they hadn't finished it. Not yet. Sometimes, solving one mystery only reveals another. Drop AIs if you saw that coming. And stay tuned, because in the shadows of justice, there are always deeper truths waiting to be discovered. 70 miles north, Detroit Police Department, 11:47 p.m. Officer Sarah Chen worked the graveyard shift in the evidence room, cataloging cold cases that would probably never be solved. It was mindless work. Scan the barcode, log the item, move to the next box. Until she opened case number 4729. The evidence box was sealed with red tape marked classified. Inside, a thin file stamped in bold letters. K, 9 unit, aggressive, unfit for duty, euthanasia recommended. Chen pulled out the file, frowning. They didn't keep files on dead police dogs in evidence. So why? A photograph slipped out. A beautiful Belgian Malinois with intelligent eyes, sitting beside a female handler. Both of them in tactical gear, both of them smiling. Chen flipped the photo over. On the back, in hasty handwriting that looked like it had been written in a hurry. K9 Luna. If something happens to Handler Officer Rebecca Torres, don't trust the official story. Ask the Miller boy. He'll understand. Chen's heart rate picked up. The Miller boy. Everyone in law enforcement had heard that story by now. The blind kid whose father was murdered, whose dog had exposed a massive corruption conspiracy. She looked at the date on Luna's file, marked for euthanasia 6 months ago. Status: unknown. Chen grabbed her phone, fingers shaking slightly as she searched for Columbus PD contact information. If Officer Torres had written that note, if Luna was like Shadow, how many other aggressive police dogs weren't broken at all? How many were witnesses? And how deep did this conspiracy really go? Thank you for following this journey. If this story moved you, hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more incredible true stories that prove courage comes in all forms, even furry ones. And remember, in a world full of darkness, sometimes all you need is someone who sees you for who you really are. Until next time, stay safe, stay brave, and never underestimate the power of a promise kept.